Have you ever trusted someone so much that you never imagined being betrayed by them? Maybe a friend, a relative, or someone you helped and yet turned their back on you. The pain of betrayal is even deeper when it comes from within, from someone who was part of your story. And that's exactly what happened to Mephibosheth. Legitimate heir to Saul's throne, marked by tragedies since childhood, he lived a surprising chapter of restoration, followed by one of the most calculated betrayals in Scripture. Imagine being welcomed by the grace of King David, receiving everything back, sitting at the table of royalty, and suddenly having everything taken away by a lie. This is the plot that involves Ziba, the clever servant who used the opportunity of the rebellion to promote himself at the expense of those he was supposed to protect. But what seemed like the end of the line for Mephibosheth turned out to be a powerful lesson in humility, loyalty, and divine justice. In this text, you will immerse yourself in a real narrative, full of twists, silent strategies and decisions that require more of the heart than of reason. And perhaps, as you learn this story, you will realize that some chapters in your life also ask for discernment between what seems right, and what really is. If you have ever had to deal with falsehood, slander, or unfair losses, this story is for you. Because sometimes, being true can seem fragile, but in the end, it's what keeps you standing. Ready to understand how God works behind the scenes when the truth is still hidden. Mephibosheth wasn't just a strange name among many in the Bible, he carried a huge weight on his shoulders. He was the grandson of King Saul, son of Jonathan, David's great friend. But when the throne became a battlefield, his life turned to dust. As a child, he suffered an accident that left him crippled, and so he began to live in hiding, away from the spotlight, forgotten in exile, as if he were a threat to the new king, even though he had never lifted a sword. You know that moment in life when everything seems to fall apart at the same time? That's what happened to him. He lost his grandfather, his father, his prestige and his mobility, all at once. And what was left? A limited body, a noble past and an uncertain future. A lot of people would feel defeated right there. But time, when guided by God, has the power to bring back even what seemed buried. And that's exactly what started to happen. Years later, with the reign already stabilized, David asked a question that would change everything. Is there still anyone from the house of Saul that I should show kindness for Jonathan's sake? This attitude reveals a lot about David's heart, a leader who knew how to honor alliances, even with time against him. Mephibosheth, who lived in Lodabar, the land of oblivion, was found. Imagine the scare, from anonymity straight to the palace. And here's a truth you need to keep, no matter how much life has taken you away from what was rightfully yours. When the time of restoration arrives, neither physical limitations nor the forgetfulness of others prevent God from acting. Mephibosheth didn't need to chase, he was picked up. Sometimes, your part is just to remain firm, because the hand that raises kings also knows how to find you in your Lodabar. Upon arriving before David, Mephibosheth must have trembled, and not just because of his physical limitations. The fear was real. Grandchildren of defeated kings were often seen as threats. But what he found there wasn't revenge, it was grace. Instead of condemning him, the king extended mercy. David saw beyond appearance and history, saw the invisible link between him and Jonathan, and decided to honor him with a gesture completely outside the standards of the time. David returned to Mephibosheth all the lands that belonged to King Saul. But more than that, it gave him a permanent place at his table. This was much more than politics, it was adoption. It was saying, you belong here, even if life has convinced you otherwise. Who would have thought that someone crippled and forgotten would become part of the royal table? It's the kind of turnaround that only true compassion can offer. And this touches on an important point in our lives. Sometimes, what changes everything is not an achievement, but someone's decision to treat us with dignity, even when we think we don't deserve it. David teaches us here the power of generosity, not as an obligation, but as a reflection of faithfulness to a promise. He didn't need to do that, but he chose to do it. And that's when the story begins to take on even deeper contours. Because when you sit at the king's table, it's not just hunger that disappears, it's identity that begins to be restored. Mephibosheth didn't just have land again, he saw himself as an heir again. And you? Have you ever stopped to think about how a single act of compassion can change someone's destiny, including yours? Ziba was more than a servant, he was the former administrator of Saul's estate, someone who knew every inch of that broken kingdom. When David brought Mephibosheth back into the picture, returning to him everything that belonged to Saul, Ziba lost something more precious than land, he lost control. And for those who have always been in charge, being put aside hurts. It is at this point that many betrayals are born, in the fertile ground of envy disguised as submission. On the outside, Ziba was loyal, but inside he was scheming. He pretended to serve Mephibosheth, but he kept in his heart the intention of returning to the top, even if it was a lie. He is the typical character who lives in the shadows, waiting for the right opportunity to act. And let's face it, how many times do we also come across people like this in our daily lives? Easy smiles, sweet words, but intentions that slip like oil. The worst kind of betrayal is the one that starts at home, and Ziba fits perfectly into that. He didn't need swords, just well-placed words. But for his manipulation to work, he needed a loophole. And as we will see, this gap would come in the form of political chaos. The terrain of instability always favors those who know how to play with subtlety. While Mephibosheth rejoiced in the restoration, Ziba prepared his move. That false humility, that "I'm here to serve," was just the backdrop for a dangerous move. The lesson here is clear, not every servant is sincere, and not every praise is a sign of support. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is precisely the one who knows where your weaknesses lie. Israel's politics were never peaceful, and the rebellion of Absalom, David's own son, shook the throne like an earthquake. In the midst of this chaos, everyone was trying to secure their own space, and that's when Ziba saw the perfect opportunity. With David fleeing the capital to escape his own son, the stage was set for lies to be mixed with good intentions. And Ziba, astute as he was, seized the moment. He went to meet David, loaded with supplies, fruit, bread, wine, everything a fugitive king needed. An apparently generous offer, but full of ulterior motives. When David asked about Mephibosheth, Ziba's response was a stab. He stayed in Jerusalem waiting for Saul's kingdom to return to him. In other words, he's cheating on you. A serious accusation, at the worst possible time. And here comes a crucial detail: David was emotionally shaken, running away from his own son, betrayed by people he trusted. There was no time for investigations. Taking Ziba's word as truth, the king decides to give him everything that belonged to Mephibosheth. It's that typical mistake that any of us can make, making important decisions based on emotion, without checking the facts. Ziba emerged victorious from there, at least for a while. His lie bore immediate fruit, and Mephibosheth, once again, was ripped away from what was rightfully his. But the story wasn't over yet. And the question that remains here is, how often is the truth buried for convenience? In times of crisis, manipulators thrive, but will it last forever? Ziba's reward came quickly, too quickly, even. In an instant, he went from servant to master, inheriting everything he previously managed. David, pressed by circumstances and the pain of Absalom's rebellion, made a decision based on words, not evidence. And in these kinds of loopholes, manipulators thrive. Ziba didn't need to lift a finger against Mephibosheth, he just needed to skillfully twist the truth. It's interesting to note how lying, for a while, seems to work. We see this in real life all the time: those who deceive, those who manipulate, those who slander, often even receive applause and promotions. But as the old saying goes, lies have short legs, and sooner or later, the truth decides to emerge. But at that moment in history, it seemed like Ziba had won the game. Mephibosheth, once again, was left with nothing. Discredited, absent from the scene, and silent, not because he didn't want to speak, but because no one gave him space. And this is one of the cruelest effects of injustice: it even steals your voice. When people believe the traitor, the innocent suffer in silence. But even so, Mephibosheth does not revolt. He waits. And this silent waiting would become an even more powerful testimony. History teaches us that the truth does not always shine in the first act. Sometimes the traitor receives pats on the back while the righteous reap silence and contempt. But time, this impartial judge, continues to tick. And if you've been through something similar, know, maintaining integrity during injustice is one of the noblest forms of resistance. Because the end of the story is yet to come. Absalom's rebellion came to an end, and with it came King David's return to Jerusalem. It was the moment when everything began to be reorganized, including the poorly told stories. And the one who appears, staggering and with torn clothes, was Mephibosheth. He wasn't there to make a scene or seek justice by shouting. His appearance spoke more than words: he hadn't taken care of himself since the day David left. A clear gesture of mourning and loyalty. Before the king, Mephibosheth explained himself. He said he wanted to go along, but Ziba stopped him, deceiving him and then slandering him. He did not ask for the land to be returned, he did not demand punishment. He just opened his heart, letting David see what had really happened. And that's what's impressive: when someone is truly loyal, they don't need elaborate speeches. The truth, sooner or later, stands on its own. David, upon listening, realized the contradiction, but the damage was already done. And here we see the weight of hasty decisions. It is not always possible to fix everything. The king, without knowing exactly who was telling the truth, or perhaps out of discomfort with the mistake made, opts for a diplomatic solution. He divides the lands between the two. A verdict that, for many, would seem unfair. But Mephibosheth's reaction reveals something even greater. "Let him have it all," said Saul's grandson, "as long as my lord the king has returned in peace." It wasn't irony, or hurt pride, it was true gratitude. Mephibosheth proved that his value was not in possessions, but in alliance. That the place at the table was more important than the size of the inheritance. And that, sometimes, divine justice is not revealed with applause, but with the peace that lives in those who choose to remain faithful. David's decision to divide the land between Ziba and Mephibosheth may seem strange at first glance. After all, now the truth had been revealed, why not right the wrong entirely? But politics, like life, does not always allow for complete reparations. David, perhaps still emotionally hurt, or wanting to avoid further conflict, opted for the middle ground. It was a pragmatic judgment, but not entirely fair. And this teaches us something: the justice of men does not always reach what is right within. Mephibosheth could have protested. He had good arguments, and now he also had the king's sympathy. But instead, he demonstrated something rare: detachment. He did not fight for land, but for honor. He didn't want to be right, he wanted to see the king restored. And that says a lot about the kind of man he was. In times of dispute, he chose peace. And this is a strength that few recognize immediately, but that God never ignores. This scene is a powerful reminder to us. Sometimes, the recognition we seek doesn't come from people, but from the peace of mind we feel when we know we've done the right thing. Mephibosheth, even crippled, even slandered, stood firm in the truth. And that, in itself, is already a victory. Because integrity is when you continue to be whole, even when they treat you as if you were half. If there is something that history shows us clearly, it is that life does not always give back what was taken from us. But when we decide not to let hurt become our identity, we make room for something much more precious, inner freedom. The same one that allows you to say, I don't need to win. I just need to be at peace with who I am. After this episode, ZIBA simply disappears from the biblical narrative. There are no mentions of honor, relevant descent, or great deeds linked to his name. He disappears from the stage just as he entered, around the edges, driven by interest. His betrayal even generated temporary gains, but did not build a legacy. And this shows us a valuable truth: what is conquered by lies rarely survives time. Mephibosheth, even without land, without political strength, and with limited mobility, is remembered in the scriptures as a man of integrity. A legitimate heir who chose the path of loyalty. His name remains as a symbol of someone who preferred to honor an alliance rather than feed an ambition. And, curiously, it was he who remained in history, not as a victim, but as an example. When we look at his trajectory, we realize that limitations never defined his value. He was crippled, yes. But it was at the king's table that his identity was restored. And it was in the silence of his humility that his legacy gained a voice. It is curious how God chooses to raise up precisely those that the world discards, to show that his justice does not follow human criteria. And here's a direct invitation: what do you want to leave as a mark? A reputation built on shortcuts like ZIBA's, or a name that, even in the midst of losses, echoes loyalty and honor? Because in the end, time always reveals who built on the sand and who planted roots in the rock. And Mephibosheth's legacy, even with scars, remained standing. The story of Mephibosheth and ZIBA goes far beyond an ancient drama. It is a mirror that reflects choices we make to this day. Who has never seen someone get away with lying? Who has never felt the bitter taste of injustice? But this biblical narrative reminds us that quick wins have an expiration date. ZIBA may have gotten land, but he lost respect. Mephibosheth lost everything, except his dignity. And that, in the end, is worth more than any possession. Lying, no matter how advantageous it may seem in the short term, always charges high interest. It can deceive a king for a while, it can manipulate the opinion of many, but it never deceives divine justice. God sees what is behind the scenes, where human eyes cannot reach. And he knows how to separate those who act with integrity from those who merely represent loyalty. It may take time, but he never fails to vindicate the righteous. And if you identify with Mephibosheth, wronged, forgotten, slandered, know that there is still a king who calls you to sit at the table, not by merit, but by grace. Who sees you beyond your faults and values you for what the world doesn't see. This story is an invitation to continue being true, even when the world applauds those who are disingenuous. Because the truth, even when it takes time, always wins. So, the next time lying seems easier, or injustice knocks at your door, remember, the story doesn't end with the betrayal chapter. It continues to the restoration chapter. And those who show integrity may even walk with a limp, but they walk with their heads held high. Always. And now, tell me, what did this story awaken in you? Have you been letting the pain of injustice steal your faith? Or maybe you are surrounded by ZIBAs, people who pretend to help but undermine your trust behind your back. Whatever your moment, Mephibosheth's journey reminds us that loyalty still pays off. That keeping the truth, even in silence, can be your most powerful weapon. Have you been the type of person who seeks immediate recognition, or are you willing to wait for divine justice? Have you harbored grievances or chosen to continue in peace, even without complete reparations? Maybe today is the day to choose who you want to be like, with Ziba, who fought for positions, or with Mephibosheth, who remained firm in the mission of honoring his alliance. So, if this story spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share with someone who is feeling wronged, silent or forgotten. And of course, if you're not already part of our community, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. With each video, you will discover how the scriptures have more to do with your life than you realize. Because here, each story is a bridge, between pain and hope, between doubt and faith. And the next transformation can start now, with one simple choice.